we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Morning, Bryce. Okay, we'll go ahead with the Pledge of Allegiance. Join me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, Josh, would you do the roll call for us this morning?
Yes, sir. Rachel Arizmendi.
Present.
Ashley Bourne. Here. Don Bransford. Here. Don Cameron. Here. Nancy Cassidy. Here. Helene Dillard. Here. Mike Gallo. Here. Crystal Haling. Eric Holst. Here. Jeff Huckabee. Here. Bryce Lumberg. Here. Martha Montoya. Frank Mueller. Joy Sterling. Andy Thulin. Mr. President, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Josh. We'll begin our meeting this morning with Secretary Ross and the departmental update. Got you off guard?
July.
A lot happened, huh?
Yeah, well, it always does. So first, I know several of you were involved in meetings with the Ag Ambassador for USTR who visited our state in July. I was very grateful that he was in the midst of almost what he thought would be finalizing the NAFTA part of the trade agreement with Mexico, and he spent over 3 days in our state. I know you hosted him. Several of you were in meetings in the Valley with him, and then we hosted a dinner here in Sacramento for him. And so he really, to his credit, he wanted to learn about agriculture that's not, as he said, what a Kansas farm boy knows. And I was very pleased to see that. As you know, the administration did announce its trade mitigation package that takes effect. Today's the 4th. It takes effect today for farmers to be able to sign up for payments under the commodity title, as well as the market mitigation losses for some of the specialty crops, including rice and dairy a little bit. Wasn't rice included a little bit in that? I thought rice was for trade. Okay, for the trade. Yeah, the food purchase. I'm sorry, the food purchase, and then they're also standing up an additional trade promotion program, which sounds like it's yet to be fully defined, but maybe it is as of today. So that package is working its way through. Earlier this month, I took a day to visit our Incident Command Control Center down in San Bernardino County. That's for our virulent Newcastle disease program. We have 176 people, about equally split between USDA and CDFA, that are there every day. The DC assigned folks are taking 3-week-long rotations. So there's some continuity, and they have that staggered. So there's always some people have been there for a while, and some of our people are doing 2-week rotations, and we just pray that there won't be other animal diseases going on during this. These numbers are pretty impressive. We're now in our 3rd month. We've surveyed over 96,880 properties. We've quarantined almost 2,700. We've released 397. We've done personal visits to 671 clinics, feed stores, farmers markets, pet stores, and egg vendors. We have 0 commercial establishments that have had any find of the disease. And there are 40 that are in the general areas, ones that moved into Riverside in particular. I think this is a testimony to having learned our lessons. The first time we had exotic Newcastle's disease, it was in the 70s, and it was a 19-month program to eradicate it. The last time we had it was 15 years ago, and it took over 8 months to eradicate it. And Dr. Annette Jones, who is now our state veterinarian, was the incident command chief. We didn't rotate then. We just sent people there, and they stayed there. So she learned a lot about going through that. And so the minute this was found in backyard game birds, we deployed all resources, and job number 1 is extensive outreach and communication and education. And I think the kind of outreach you see that I just told you about, in addition to showing up at various church masses on Sundays, has been very, very effective. That's how we found every one of these, is someone taking their birds in to a clinic or making a phone call to the hotline. We did have it move into Ventura County earlier this month, but that seems to be a very isolated event. So job number 1 is educate, outreach, communicate. Job number 2 is eradicate it the moment we find it. Job number 3 is enhanced biosecurity surveillance with all of our commercial facilities, so that we've gone in, we're doing inspections, they're doing some of their own sampling. We've done audits of their biosecurity plan and enhanced that. So I feel that we will be able to keep this out of the commercial flux. We just have to remember that it's a marathon and not a sprint. But that incident command actually reminds me that when it comes to the pest part of our programs and the disease plants, we have incident command almost 24/7 every day of the year. And unfortunately, we keep finding HLB trees. But the good news is we're finding HLB trees because we're getting called, and again, it comes back to that community outreach and education. We're doing door-to-door inspections, and when we do the sampling and find that we have to go back, people have been very, very cooperative in working with us. So we now have over 700 trees, but they're all in the same metropolitan area in the LA basin. We also have an oriental fruit fly here in Sacramento, so I'm opening up the newspaper to what we did yesterday, for example, at the farmers market under the freeway. This is one of the largest farmers markets in the state, usually about 12 to 13,000 people on a Sunday morning. And I didn't go yesterday, and I'm feeling really bad because Dan Best was experimenting with plastic draping of all of the fruit and vegetable bins, and he said that it had some hiccups. I'm just going to leave it at that. But, it's good to experience that in our own backyard because so many communities get it the same thing year after year after year. And then I wanted to end by disclosing that last week USDA released their numbers of the 2017 cash crop value. California agriculture again is number 1 at $50.13 billion. They are going through the process of evaluating each county by county. That's why there's always a time lag. But in releasing this first estimate of our crop value, they also adjusted the 2016 crop value from $46.04 billion to $47.4 billion. So it's a process of getting initial numbers at kind of that grand scale, then the individual county numbers that come in, and then some of that's just how you all sell things and cash and getting it all accounted for the crop of that year. So it's about a 2-year process to make that happen. And then, of course, there's a lot going on in water, and the legislature ended last week, and we didn't get drinking water this year, but it will be back. We have the commitment of leadership in both houses, and I hope to stay engaged on that regardless of where I sit. Yes, Joy.
I just want to say thank you and commend you for a terrific joint statement with Felicia Marcus. I thought that was really meaningful, and I think it'll rally us all to go back into the breach.
Yeah, I think I had an opportunity to meet with the speaker on Friday evening because it's really important for people to understand that a coalition like the one that was built does not happen that often in this town, and it's very real, and it actually got stronger over time. But there are a lot of people not part of that coalition or even had people in that coalition who were critical that you can't compromise and you shouldn't work with those people. So it's going to be very important to not let time lag and to be the convener of all the stakeholders to get to a real resolution. The people that came up here for the rally at noon on Friday have waited a very long time, and they finally had their voice heard, and I think we want to all work to help resolve this problem. Thanks.
In the calculation of the crop value,
Yes.
how do they factor in farmers markets, which is pretty much cash?
Well, not being an IRS auditor or anything, I don't know how to answer that exactly.
I'm just curious. Is there
But they, just if you are in a certified farmer's market, there's a lot of oversight on those and the collection of data. You are filing for your space at the market, somewhat dependent upon what you're selling and volume. So there is a reporting on that. And again, it's because in California, we have our county agricultural commissioner system. I mean, I think it's a huge asset to the infrastructure of agriculture in the state, being as big as we are, with the diversity that we have, that we actually have an ag commissioner in every state. And so they're intimately involved with the people who are selling at farmers markets. They also have to inspect them for pests and disease and making sure that what they're selling is what they grew, which you can count on if it's a certified California farmers market. If it's not a certified California farmers market, Jay.
Do we know what percentage of the gate farmers markets represent?
It's still in the scheme of a $50 billion farm gate value, it's still a very, very low number. But I think what's important, well, there's two things. One is very real. For those farmers, those dollars going direct from the consumer to the farmer allows them to capture more of a product than if they found an outlet to send it into. And secondly, I don't know how we would put a monetary value of the opportunity for consumers to interface with their farmer and actually engage in a conversation about, why do the tomatoes not look as good as I want them to? I mean, that's what I usually hear, that or your prices are too high, which always are kind of like fighting words to me, but that's just me, because I know how hard it is to grow those crops. So percentage-wise, it's still a very low number, but I think it's a very important part of community building and connecting rural and urban California. So I don't know how to put a monetary value on that. We'll have to ask Dan Sumner if he can put a monetary value on that.
If I recall, I think 3 to 4 years ago, the U.S. Department of Agriculture Economic Research Service did an estimate for farmers markets nationally and kind of breaks down values by state.
It did.
So I can share that with you as well.
Yeah, you're right, because it was the first time that at the national level they tried to measure price.
Karen, thank you for that update, and thank you for your amazing work, all you do. Karen, I was wondering about Assembly Member Ana Caballero's bill, AB 2050. It passed out of the legislature. It's a clean, safe drinking water.
It's a consolidation, is that the consolidation?
It's a consolidation bill and kind of a governance bill related to clean, safe drinking water. Is that considered a helpful piece of legislation?
So there were a lot of discussions in the closing days about different pieces that make up the whole package, and clearly consolidation is a helpful piece. It is not the solution, and I think that it was being characterized as if you just do this, it will solve it, and it won't. But obviously, the more work that we can do to consolidate systems, to give them a better financial foundation, it will reduce the amount of total dollars that may be needed. But it's not the total solution. So yes, consolidation was a part of the overall package approach to this. I don't want to blow anything, but I do have to commend Josh and Undersecretary Jenny Lester-Moffett, because their lives have been taken over by preparation for next week's big events around the Global Climate Action Summit, as well as our two-day event in Sonoma. But it is shaping up to be a really powerful event, and I'm just so pleased with all their work, and I'm really glad Josh could take time out to be with us today.
We'll see.
I also want to thank one of our speakers, Director of Water Resources, Carla Namath, for being here. She's kind of busy right now, but she has been busy since I've known her. So she's the only person I know that actually has 32 hours in her workday.
Thank you, Secretary.
Just one quick question. I've had some faculty that are upset about Proposition 12, and I really don't know that much about it.
I used to know numbers of everything, but now I need to know a title or what it does.
I don't know if I have the title. I'll look it
Oh,
up.
wait a minute, is 12 the
Something to do with animals.
Yes, okay, so Proposition 12, I should know. Proposition 12 was sponsored by the Humane Society of the United States to accelerate the timeline for cage-free egg production in the state of California. We passed Proposition 2 10 or 12 years ago, which was somewhat vague in how it would be enforced or what the standards would be. And so this is accelerating the process to make the changes to completely cage-free. It's even accelerated beyond what the egg industry and HSUS had agreed to federally about 5 years ago, and the rest of the livestock sector prevented that from taking effect. So that is Proposition 12. It also prohibits certain practices for pork production and veal production. Right now, it doesn't seem to have very much organized opposition because people need all their capital to invest in their facilities.
Go ahead, Don.
I'm curious, though, why is the faculty upset? Is there a health issue that they're, what's the concern?
Their concern was that they felt that it was going to shut down some of their research. There was some language in there somewhere along the way that they felt would shut down research on animals as well. So they've got Adrian Lopez looking more closely at it, but it's already on the ballot for November, so.
Thank you, Helene. And thank you, Secretary Ross, for the update. I know you have an extremely busy schedule, just nonstop.
And it has been. No one comes to see me anymore.
So we'll begin our meeting on California with California Water Update. Carla Nemeth is the Director of California Department of Water Resources. And I know you're on a tight schedule today, so we'll let you get going. Thank you.
Good morning, folks. It's good to be here. I don't think I ever turned down an opportunity to come talk to the Food and Ag Board. And part of it is because I don't ever feel like I have enough time to get out and really visit with folks, which is where you learn most of what you need to know, actually. So thank you for the opportunity. I wanted to give you a quick highlight of the few things the department has coming. We are hoping to release our public draft of the 2018 update of the California Water Plan. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks. There'll be a public comment period. We are required to update that plan every 5 years, so the last one was 2013. So we'll have a public review process and aim to finalize it by December. A couple of, I think, important things that folks in the agricultural community and water community at large will appreciate about this revised or updated water plan is a greater focus on metrics and how we actually measure improvements, better data supporting the plan. In different parts of California where we need to go to create more water secure regions. As you all know, there's a lot of different water pressures on the agricultural community, sustainable groundwater. We have our challenges with the Delta. We have the opportunity for new storage to come online. As director, I really want to make the water plan be something that I think is a little bit more relevant at the local level in terms of how we integrate all these pieces, both at the regional level to acknowledge all the investment that's going on, which is hugely important for water security in California, but also importantly how it ties in with the state's priorities and integrates with some major water milestones that we've achieved in the course of the last 8 years under the Brown administration. So look for that to be out in draft form, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, and we will have a public process that supports that as well. I'm sure you all are reading the papers as I am. We've got a lot going on in these final few months of the Brown administration, and the governor assures me, and I assure him, that I am in fact working through January 4th of 2019. He's going to be working right up until that last day, and we still have a lot to accomplish in water, and I don't think it's surprising that some of the most difficult issues, of course, maybe get saved until the end of an administration. The administration is working very hard on a couple of fronts. I think first and foremost are the voluntary agreements that the Natural Resources Agency expects to bring in proposal form to the Water Board in October. We've been at work on these agreements for a long time now, a couple of years. And that is in part a function of the Water Board's own process in which they have been preparing environmental documents on the San Joaquin side of the system, and then had expected to move to the Sacramento Basin. What the governor had directed the Natural Resources Agency to do is to work with stakeholders to determine whether or not there was a sort of quote-unquote settlement, or rather an alternative way of meeting the requirements of the Clean Water Act by pursuing a comprehensive settlement, so both watershed, both big basins at once. And so that's what we've been working on. And what has been critical is to understand in more detail what the Water Board, how they were approaching the Sacramento Basin. And they did so in the beginning of July, which has been an important milestone that I think has prompted a lot of intensifying discussions among many parties in the Sacramento Basin. So that includes obviously the main stem of the Sacramento River, the Feather, the Yuba, the American, and McCollum. So a lot of parties needing to come together and talk about how we would put together specific actions to be implemented over the course of the next 15 years in all the individual tributaries, including improvements to flow regimes, but also, importantly, physical habitat restoration and other kinds of measures that we know are needed to achieve the environmental benefits that we want to see. You all may be aware of the Bureau of Reclamation's letter to the Water Board. They also sent a letter to the Department of Water Resources notifying us that they are triggering, if you will, the dispute resolution clause of the Coordinated Operating Agreement. And that's the agreement that was put in effect in 1986 by an act of Congress to essentially settle out or to avoid, if you will, a water rights dispute between the two projects. And that's the way in which DWR and the Bureau of Reclamation jointly operate the State Water Project and the Central Valley Water Project. We have been, in a less formal way, if you will, we have been actively engaged in these discussions with the Bureau for about the last 2 years. What this letter means is we enter into a 12-month period of intensifying, more formal discussions with the Bureau of Reclamation. If we can't come to closure on what adjustments to the Coordinated Operating Agreement would be mutually agreeable by both parties, then we impanel a 3-person review panel that takes another 12 months to make its set of recommendations. I think there's a lot of reasons that this has intensified most recently. I think the drought was and continues to be something that really drives how we need to plan better for the future. And we had a lot of challenges, if you all remember, particularly with temperature controls on the Shasta part of the system. We all experienced a lot of challenges in the drought, and I think there's some conversations to be had about how our projects are mutually performing during a broader range of hydrologic conditions to better understand the limitations that we have and to better understand how the projects themselves, how the facilities themselves actually perform. The department is also working very intensively on the Water Fix project. I'm glad to report that the department has established its own Office of Delta Conveyance, and we have a new deputy director who reports to the director's office, who's managing the very important oversight role that the department will have on the design and construction of the facility. As you may be aware, we have a joint powers authority of the state water contractors who are funding the project that will actually do the design and construction. DWR will continue to be the owner-operator of the project and, of course, is the permit holder. So we have a very strong oversight role in working with that Joint Powers Authority as they get up and running and work through the final permits for water fix and move into a construction phase. We do have final permits hopefully coming from the Water Board. As you know, we have been engaged for a few years now in a water rights proceeding that would enable the new points of diversion along the Sacramento River. We've just started what's called Part 2 of that proceeding, which really focuses on the estuarine needs of the system and the potential effects that water fix would have on those kinds of uses. We also have a certification in front of the Delta Stewardship Council, and the Stewardship Council, I believe, has several appeals in as to the project's conformance with the Delta Plan, and they will be proceeding along their process to ensure that the water fix project as proposed is in fact in compliance with the Delta Plan or in conformity with the Delta Plan. Part of the issues, of course, in the Delta also relate to the project's potential impact on agriculture. One of the key items in the water fix environmental review document, which we've highlighted in our application to the Stewardship Council, is an ag land stewardship program in the Delta, whereby we can, hopefully in a more organized way, work with all of the Delta counties to support an overarching approach to supporting agriculture in the Delta. And part of what I think could make that successful is really putting those local governments in more of the driver's seat in terms of what agriculture looks like regionally, and having the department participate more as a funding entity to help achieve those goals in the Delta. We continue to move forward on the sustainable groundwater implementation. We have been in a process of reprioritizing groundwater basins, which is essentially the result of additional information. And I would say we have, I think it's about 14 basins that are that previously weren't considered the medium or high priority groundwater basins that are now in that category and are therefore required to submit a groundwater management plan to the department. And I think we had about 38 actually no longer be required to put a plan into the department. Some of those entities may very well choose to do it anyway, which is not a bad thing to be doing. But we continue to make important progress there. I think the real challenge is going to be when the rubber meets the road, so to speak, over the course of the next 18 to 24 months when plans need to be formulated and over to the department. While the department plays an important technical support role to the groundwater management agencies as they've been developed, we will have a different part of the department that will be the evaluators of the plans as they come in, and it's an opportunity at the department to I think connect some of the things that need to be done to achieve sustainable groundwater basins a little bit more directly with our integrated regional watershed management planning function. So we've got a lot of good cross-cutting opportunities at the department. And I would add to that some of the flood control responsibilities of the department, and the ability of floodwaters to be used more proactively for groundwater recharge is going to be important into the future. And maybe Secretary Ross, I'll end where I began, which is I think that's what's exciting about the California Water Plan, is the need that we have to integrate all of these pieces, and that's where we're headed at the department. And folks in the ag community are our partners in that effort. So I'm delighted to be here and answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. We'll go ahead and open this up for any questions.
I'm going to ask, it's not fair, but I'm going to ask it. Because this board takes very seriously its responsibility to advise and make recommendations to the governor. And if there were a couple things that you would say, yes, that would be very helpful, the timing is right, an appropriate letter to the governor, any things to stress. I think that one of the things we've learned a lot about through the One Science program of the Delta Stewardship Council and our implementation committee is this land-water connection. So I'm thrilled to hear you acknowledge that in the ways you talk about integration, because I think that there's a lot of power there, again, in the hands of landowners to come to this table. We've seen it in different parts of the state. So I would truly appreciate any counsel you might give to this board, which I'm sure we'll debate today, any letter they might want to send to the governor's office.
Sure, and I think one point on that maybe gets a little bit lost in the headlines, particularly in the context of the voluntary agreements, is that a lot of the things that we need to do in the tributaries for physical habitat restoration will require good partnerships with landowners, and ways in which we can be more regional in our approach to how we permit those kinds of projects. The department is participating in some efforts, I think with the Environmental Defense Fund and Sustainable Conservation, on these kinds of tributary approaches to permitting. And those kinds of implementation tools for the voluntary agreements are going to be really important. And it's going to be very important that we have good local water districts who want to partner with landowners and partner with the state to actually implement some of the projects that we would foresee being part of these voluntary agreements. It's really important for the Department of Water Resources to establish functional partnerships with local water districts and local agencies that want to do the work. They tend to know the communities best. DWR has a lot of technical expertise, but there's a lot of real knowledge on the ground, and the department wants to really empower those kinds of organizations to do the work.
Thank you, Director Nemeth. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations on your confirmation, and thank you for your commitment to work to the final day. I know that is true. I know that is true of your boss as well. I've heard Governor Brown say, hey, we're not going anywhere, and the water issues are key. And we want to be there with you, right, to the very end. There's so much to do. I was wondering, in relationship to COA, if there is a possibility of a win-win type of solution there, or do you see it have to be a one-party win, one-party lose in order to get an agreement, or is that possibility of a win-win available?
Well, I don't think a zero-sum approach is going to work. And what I've noticed, having engaged in the discussions only recently, is there's a lot of talking past each other. There's a real need to update the hydrology that we use in CalSim to help us understand how both projects are performing. And I think in the approach of kind of joint fact-finding, which is the approach we're in now, I think that has the potential to yield something that's balanced, and we're going to need that moving forward. We are absolutely inextricably intertwined as Californians, the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project. There really just is not a way around that. And hopefully that's a good thing, because if you step back, we have a lot of assets, but we also have a lot of assets that are in need of a lot of work into the future to make them work more efficiently. So the COA piece is an important foundational piece in terms of the joint operations. But I think Bryce, as we head into the future, and California, obviously water fix is a sort of a premier piece of the State Water Project, or is proposed as such. But there's a lot of other work we're going to need to do on the State Water Project. Oroville, I did not mention where we are with Oroville, but that's also kind of puts that issue front and center. And how it relates to COA is this way. I think as we're starting to understand as Californians a real need to reinvest in the backbone of the system, we're also going to need a system that's going to work more efficiently with better technologies than when it was built, 5 decades ago. We had 16 million people in California. So we have different choices to make in terms of how we rehabilitate the system. And we need to be really conscientious about interacting with the Bureau and doing it, I think, in ways that are more frequent, because all of these kinds of investment decisions factor into how the facilities perform and how we share the water in California, and we want to do that. I think we very much want to avoid a water rights proceeding. It just has the aura of decades of litigation that really don't help Californians. So I hope there is a win-win there somewhere. I think being on a path of joint fact-finding is going to be important to do that. And I think we have to consider all the investments of new facilities coming online, and how parties in California, with the beneficiary pays principle in place, how they can access those kinds of investments and improve their water supply security. And COA is a piece of that.
I could have asked the same question from the Bureau side. We'll see what kind of answer we get. I mean, you got two state contractors talking to one another there.
Yeah.
Bryce, just share, and there'd be no problem at all. But I have a couple questions. One is, or I'll make a couple of statements. One is, I have a concern in this process in terms of the number of hours in the day to get these accomplished. There's a small group of people that are doing all of this, and it's monumental. And, it would have been nice to just set a few of these aside. But maybe they're like dominoes, and if you get through COA, then that's going to make the next process easier. But, I mean, it's Herculean to get through this. Now, and I think on the voluntary settlement side, there are those that are probably further along than others. But, as I read the paper and I sit out there, all of a sudden the federal government is engaging in a completely different way than what is typical. And it makes me wonder, it just makes me think your job and this job of accomplishing all this is going to be all the more difficult. At the same time, as I talk to growers, when they look at the voluntary settlement agreement, they look at COA, they look at water fix, and they look at Sigma, they're looking at less water. And which is huge, because if surface water leaves and eventually Sigma kicks in, so they've lost two sources. And I guess, what do I tell those growers?
I think that a couple of things. I think that it is important to acknowledge that, right now, so to speak, the pie is shrinking, and folks are feeling it from all aspects. I think the way forward is a better investment in science and other physical things that we need to be doing to help the fish species that are the focal point of a lot of our regulatory environment, help those species do better. I also think we do need to invest in infrastructure, and we do need to invest in infrastructure in such a way that it, I think, captures more of the regional needs, but also are fundamentally connected to how the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project are capable of delivering water supplies. I think there are real opportunities in some of the flood interface issues, particularly in parts of the Central Valley that are really have very intensive issues as it relates to severe groundwater overdraft. And it's not going to be something that we can resolve over the course of the next 4 to 5 months. But in my view, what's really critical about the voluntary agreements is the opportunity in an institutional way to develop a history of success and a history of actually doing the projects we say we're going to do, because I think we'll all be better off over the course of the next 15 years if we're able to actually do the kinds of physical restoration that we know are needed. And we're going to argue over water and how much flow exactly where and when forever in California, and that's a little bit part of who we are. But we are, I think we're at a breaking point where we have to define a path that enables us to bring in on the environmental side of the equation, if you will, all these other factors that are limiting the ability for important fish species to recover in California. And then on the water supply side, we need to integrate a lot of the investments at the local level. And we have generational investments to make in the way that we convey water, through or under or around the Delta, and generational investments to make in storage. All those things are going to be necessary, I think, to tell growers that there is a secure future for water in California, and by extension, a secure future for agriculture in California.
I guess my concern in the process, though, is, if we look at a 15-year time frame, it'll take us 3 years to get a project approved. And so you're looking at 2 or 3 cycles of fish, and you're not going to turn it around. And in the meantime, the impacts to ag are irreversible. And I mean, that's what people are facing, because, you just don't turn any of this around in 5 to 7 or 10 years. I mean, it's going to take a longer bridge than that to see the effects, the positive effects. And I believe we've got to do that, but I'm not sure what happens in the countryside in the meantime.
Frank, and then Bryce.
Can you briefly touch on the Orville Dam
Sure.
project status?
So we're working towards another November 1st deadline to complete the reconstruction of the upper part of the gated spillway, and also making some additional improvements on the emergency spillway. We are on target. I never take that for granted. Case in point, some of the Reading fires created some challenges, so you really just never know. So it's really important that we keep on that work. We've got people there working extraordinary hours. We're at about 750 folks who are there in rotation, week in, week out. They take Sunday off to do maintenance, but they're working really hard. I think we're going to meet that deadline thus far. The other important effort that we're engaged in is a comprehensive needs assessment, and that is, if we've done these repairs to the both spillways, and we've done as much as we can to restore their original design capacity. You know, what does it mean for the future? And that's a process that's about 2.5 years. We're working very intensely with the local community up there as well, and that's going to essentially establish what more do we need to do with the facility as it relates to public safety. That's priority number one. And there will be a lot of conversations about some design features that we can add. My expectation is we'll engage pretty intensively with the Corps of Engineers on their flood control curve. So we were operating off a 1977 manual, and we still are, with some clear adjustments to account for the challenges we have up at Oroville. But that's something that needs to be updated, would be updated as part of this process, and reflect all that we know about the increasing intensity of California hydrology, where we have longer periods of drought, of course, and then very intense and warmer storm systems moving through. Yeah, I think that's we've got a lot of work that's ongoing at Oroville, and that's where we are. And I am very hopeful that we will continue to meet our construction obligations, and it's because we've got a really good team up there and a contractor that's really been working with us arm in arm with both our partners at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and, of course, our Division of Safety of Dams here in California.
I see the lights of Oroville every night.
Yeah.
The top of the dam is visible from the valley. I did hear the contractor give a presentation in March, just impressive. I would just encourage you, any of you, if you have a opportunity to hear the contractor give a presentation, it is an amazing undertaking. Not the largest project the contractor has ever done, but the shortest time frame and the shortest plan, shortest build, and shortest time frame as far as getting up and running on it. To my friend Don Bransford, I would just say reasonable people can come up with reasonable decisions using facts, data, and the metrics, and I expect that will happen. I have full confidence in that. I really appreciate your focus on infrastructure and new water, more water. Just speaking to the project that Don Bransford is close to, Sites Reservoir, and the comments that I heard through some of the folks in Fish and Wildlife, just that why work with locals to develop more water when we can just take it or get it through the regulatory process was just very disappointing. And I hope in the future that as more projects come on or available, that we would be able to, well, I know with your department, we're in agreement, but that it takes a whole team all across the regulatory or the agencies to get things done. And thank you for your support and effort in getting the Sites Reservoir underway.
So Carla, I know you're pushed for time. I really appreciate you coming in and spending some time and giving your insights to our board. It's really critical. I don't know why you looked at me when you talked about extremely overdrafted basins.
Well, thank you very much.
No, thank you again. Great to have you here.
All right, thanks.
All right, next on our agenda, Michael Carlin is the Deputy Director and General Manager and Chief Operating Officer of the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. You join us. Michael supervises the agency's efforts in capital planning, emergency response, asset management, and other functions across the 3 business lines: water, power, and wastewater. Prior to this position, Michael served as the Assistant General Manager for Water, where he led the effort to diversify the water supply portfolio. He continues in that role, leading many of the environmental initiatives, including addressing the impact of climate change on the organization. So Michael, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. That was a great introduction. I just would add that we're a water power sewer agency. We serve water to about 2.7 million customers in the Bay Area, not just San Francisco, but also San Mateo County, Santa Clara County, and Alameda County. We provide sewer services in San Francisco and a portion of San Mateo County. And of course, we supply power for our municipal needs in San Francisco. Can you bring up the slides, please? And I'm going to skip over a few slides. Okay. Well, while they bring up the slides, I'll just go through the agenda, what I'm going to talk about a little bit. First off, I'm going to talk a little bit about our relationship with the Modesto and Turlock irrigation districts. We do have a long-term relationship with them. We'll talk a little bit about how we have been planning our water supply for the past 10 years, and somebody said they can bring a project on in 3 years. I'd love to bring a project on in 3 years. It takes me about 10 to 15 years to bring a water supply project online. And he knows that. And I'll talk a little bit about the water quality control plan, the effects on the Tuolumne River, and specifically on our water supply, and why we think we have a more superior plan that's available for us. And again, we'll talk a little bit about negotiated settlements in the final presentation. Okay, there we go. There it is. Oh, we're just downloading it. And I will skip through a few slides, and it's going to be a little bit San Francisco-centric, just because we wanted to show you what the effect is on us. We work very closely with Modesto and Turlock irrigation districts, and the effects on them are slightly different. But all in all, I think as a partnership that we have come up with a plan that actually is better than what the state board has proposed. And I'll show you a little bit about how it affects us through a drought sequence. We have a drought planning sequence as well. So we'll do this. Just so you can see where Hetch Hetchy Reservoir is located is in Yosemite National Park. We have other two reservoirs there, Eleanor and Cherry as well. Eleanor is in the Yosemite National Park, and Cherry is in Stanislaus National Forest. So our relationship goes back to 1913 with the Modesto and Turlock irrigation districts with the passage of the Raker Act, which defined the terms under which we could build the Hetch Hetchy project. It allows San Francisco to bring water from the Sierras down to San Francisco. We have a number of agreements with the irrigation districts, and the one that's the latest one is 1966, the fourth agreement. Why this is important, because it ties us together, that states for our ability to create the water bank in Don Pedro and allow us to divert water in the summer when we don't have our water rights in effect. It gives us the ability to pre-deliver water to the districts, and then allows us to divert. The 1966 Fourth Agreement says that if there's any federal requirement on Don Pedro, and this is where we get into the FERC relicensing of Don Pedro, San Francisco would put up 51.71% of that water required by that federal agency. Now, you're going to have to make a little bit of a leap of faith here, because we're talking about the state board, but they do have, under the Clean Water Act, what's known as 401 water quality certification, which they can put on a FERC license, which would be the flow requirement on the FERC license. So right now, we've worked with the districts. It is their project. It's not our project. We don't own anything at Don Pedro. And they submitted a final license application in October 2017, and it included the Tuolumne River Management Plan, which I'll touch on briefly. So a little background on what we did back in 2008 as we planned our water system improvement program. I'm proud to say, actually, we're almost done. We've spent $4.8 billion strengthening our system, seismically upgrading it, building some conjunctive use projects. We were building a recycled water plant. And what we did back then in order to get it through the planning process is we agreed to a variant where we said we would not take more than 265 million gallons per day from the local creeks and watersheds up in the Sierras. In essence, we basically conceded a lot of our ability to divert water, going forward. This is just a quick timeline that we've been involved in this. I wanted to say one thing. The state board actually issued their science plans back in 2010. They issued the original water quality control plan update in 2012. It's interesting to note that in their 2012 update, they had circled the irrigation districts, and they left us out of it, not understanding our contractual relationship with them, which we've now corrected, and of course, we're right in the midst of things. So the plan that the state board proposed was to modify the lower San Joaquin River to dramatically increase flows in the Tuolumne, Stanislaus, and Merced to protect fall run Chinook salmon and steelhead. But the state's proposal is based on other river systems, and I think this is an important point. It's not site-specific. The state's proposal would be 40% unimpaired flow, February through June. Not targeted to any sort of function, just February through June. That much water has to go down the river. We believe it has limited benefits for the Tuolumne River and would seriously reduce our water supply in times of drought. What have we done with the districts is we've presented an alternative that basically looks at habitat improvements and strategic, we call them functional flows, that are targeted to a biological response. How did we come up with this? Is we've spent $25 million over the past 7 years doing site-specific studies on the Tuolumne, so we know the river. It's not like we're proposing something that we're not going to get a response. We know this river. The state rejected our proposal because it did not fit within their 40% unimpaired flow boards, sideboards. We now have evolved this into the Tuolumne River Management Plan, which was submitted as part of the FERC relicensing, and we still believe that a negotiated settlement is better than costly and unproductive litigation, but we're prepared to go that way. What's in the River Management Plan? And these are things that basically, first off, that the state board feels sometimes they don't have control over. And I think that's debatable. So strategically timed flows. Basically, you're doing a flow for a habitat response, or you're doing it for some sort of functionality such as cleaning gravel or things of that nature. We also proposed basically to put in additional gravel in the river. A lot of these rivers have been mined, so they don't have the proper substrate for fish production, and we would actually go back in and change that. I mentioned gravel cleaning because their silt gets into the gravels and the fish don't use the gravels. So actually, if you did some strategic functional flows in the fall, you could actually clean the gravel. Putting in more habitat, boulders, woody debris, things of that nature. Predator control, not eradication. People keep thinking we want to eradicate predators. We don't. We just want to control them. We want to suppress their numbers so we can basically have a healthy fishery. We talked about a potential restoration hatchery, and this is basically to supplement the fish on the river. And of course, we want to do it with an adaptive management approach. We'll skip through these. So let's get down to it. So what I'm going to talk about now is Chinook salmon smolt production. And the green bar that's going to come up will be 2,000 female spawners in the river. And how many smolts do they actually produce? And then we had 10,000 female spawners, and then what's the discharge? So the base case is what is being put in today. The next bar over 673,000 acre feet is what the state board is proposing with 40% unimpaired flow. And what we're proposing is 290,000 acre feet, but more in a strategic way that we would actually produce fish. So when you look at it in the base case, in the number of female spawners, again, this is the available habitat. If you have too many fish in the habitat, they don't reproduce. You have to have sort of an optimum amount that can occupy the habitat. With the state board proposal, which is almost 3 times as much water, you get a slight increase in production of smolts. And with our 290,000 acre feet strategically placed down the river at certain times of the year, you get a significant increase in fish production. Let's look at steelhead, same thing. Again, this is based on 500 resident adults, and then the gold bar is 10,000 resident adults. So if you have 500 resident adults, basically these are the number of young years will be produced per spawner. When you look at the state board proposal, putting that much water down the river actually, and this is counterintuitive, is not good for the fish, because what you're doing is you're blowing the fish out at the wrong time of the year. You want to hold them, you want them to be there over summer. You don't want to start pushing the fish out too soon if they're too small and the predators get them. And of course, then we show our proposal, which then it has a functionality, a purpose for every drop of water that goes down the Tuolumne River. Predator control, I mean, striped bass are an introduced species. They're a big sports fishery here in California, but they're one of the biggest predators that we see on the Tuolumne River, along with other largemouth bass and smallmouth bass. I'm not going to go into this, but this is kind of illustrates. You think about 40% unimpaired flow, February through June. It's easy to do. It's not too much. This is the entire flow schedule, and it does every flow, every line on this does a different thing, and that's the important thing. It either enhances the habitat, or it performs a function on the river such as gravel cleaning. One of the things we talk about is adaptive management. I think this is one of the things that people go, oh, we can just adapt and manage this thing and see how it goes. Somebody mentioned 15 years, that's five life cycles of fish, it's about 3 years for each of the salmon. You can't have your hands on the dials and keep turning it all the time. You have to kind of set your course, take it down a path and see what happens. You can do this in a kind of transparent way, in a very structured way when you make decisions, but if everybody starts thinking that, oh, it's just trial and error, what if we just do this, what if we do that, what if we just put more water down, what if we, it gets to be a mess and you never get the results you want. Just to give you an idea, I'm going to talk about water supply impacts. It's Hetch Hetchy Reservoir in January 1991. That was a big drought for us. We have a planning scenario where people have called this draconian. Actually, I think it's becoming more of the norm. We have an 8.5-year specific drought planning scenario. We take the 87 through 92 drought and we add the 76, 77 drought on the end of it. And what we want to do is have no more than 20% rationing for a total system demand of 265 million gallons per day. Right now, we're serving about 210 million gallons per day. The gross per capita use in San Francisco is 42 gallons per person. So we're kind of planning for the future, and people have said, well, if you just had a shorter drought period, you could make it through things. Well, the urban water management plans requires a 3-year drought planning scenario. The governor's required a 5-year drought planning scenario. We're at 8.5 years. We believe in climate change, and we're doing a risk assessment, which will be completed next year, of what should be our drought planning scenario. Now, this is what it looks like during a drought planning, during a drought. This is based on total system storage, and you can see the 8.5 years. In year 3, you're basically at 10%. You're asking for 10% rationing. Then you get into year 5, 20%, 25%, and then you're basically out of water. Not a good thing. I lost my job, I think, in year 3. But this is how we do it. We plan for alternative supplies, and this is when we have to have those alternative supplies on hand. And we do our drought planning scenario. And it's not like we're not building projects and making more water. We are. We're investing, and everybody should do that strategically. The green dotted line is what happens under the drought planning with the state board's 40% unimpaired flow requirement February through June. We run out of water in year 5. Not a good thing. So what would you say you should do? Well, you should call for rationing earlier. Well, the problem is you'd have to call for 40% rationing in year 1 of our 8.5-year planning cycle. Now, when I talk to the state board members and ask if anyone can predict a drought, and they kind of looked at me and said, well, if we could predict, if we're in a drought and 40% rationing after year 1, I would hire you immediately and pay you a lot of money. It's that tough to do because you don't know you're in that cycle until you're a year or 2 into it. And then really the biggest thing here is like in year 6 to 7, you're basically at 64% rationing, which is unheard of and unreal. In the 87 through 92 drought, San Francisco was looking at 45% rationing, and I can tell you that was very tough to do, given sort of where people were already saving water and the population growing. So we called for 10% rationing during the last drought. We got 14%, and we achieved, across our service area in San Francisco, we achieved about 20%. If proposed, we would have been looking at 20 to 30% more rationing on top of that savings. So again, the whole idea that we can just save a lot of water and we've not gotten the low-hanging fruit while we have. So I'm going to skip that one. Some editorials. This is kind of interesting to me. Is in the Chronicle, nature is as likely as the water board to reduce SARA flows. It's true. We need to just plan for a changing thing. Climate change places restrictions on our water supply, and every community will face these kind of changes. Yes, we all agree to that. So it's all within our new mantra. What would our investments have to be? Somebody mentioned Sites Reservoir. Well, if we wanted to maintain 265 million gallons per day demand with no more than 20% rationing, we'd have to build a reservoir that was basically 900,000 acre feet and fill it. That's 2.5 times the size of Hetch Hetchy. I don't know where I'm going to do that. We would look at, purified water projects. This is taking wastewater and making it into potable drinking water. And yes, we are looking at that with a number of other entities in the Bay Area, but we're still in the discussion stage, and it's very uncertain how that actually work out. Or, my favorite was we can build a desal plant in the Delta and take out 100 million gallons per day. I'm sure that's going to go over real big, and it's an easy permitting process. So, the state's proposal has significant impacts on our water supply with really uncertain benefits. We believe that basically the benefits can be achieved on the Tuolumne River using our scientific-based approach and using functional flows more than just using unimpaired flow. And we still believe that negotiated settlements are superior to a regulatory solution that will only end non-productive litigation. So thank you, and I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you. Excellent report. Do we have any questions? Joy?
Thank you.
Sure.
That's a truly excellent report. Why is recycling so problematic?
Oh, recycling is not problematic. It's just, so recycling water for just irrigation purposes and such is not problematic. We just don't have a lot of irrigation uses in the San Francisco proper. Outside of it, there is some additional uses. But what I'm talking about is taking that wastewater and actually going all the way to making it into drinking water. And the regulations are a little bit not quite there yet. So right now, they want you to take it maybe to a reservoir, and you have what's called a time, residence time in the reservoir before you take it into your treatment plant. Other places we're talking about is just putting it into our transmission pipelines and just delivering it. So there's lots of different ways you can do it, and it's not quite, it certainly isn't quite there yet from the public health perspective.
Bryce?
Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for your investment in alternatives, and I think the more investment and more kind of alternatives, hopefully the best ideas come to the surface, so to speak. I had heard that in the presentation of the San Joaquin, the State Water Board's proposal was that the water you lose through the regulatory process you can get from farmers, and that farmers can move to groundwater to replace the surface water that they're losing. Is that report a true report, and what is your response to that sort of answer in regard to the impacts of this regulatory process?
That wasn't a very satisfactory sort of alternative that was presented to us on how we could make up water, which was basically we can buy water from irrigation districts, and we pointed out to numerous folks that when everybody's in a drought, there's not a lot of water you can buy. That's the reality of it. Having irrigation districts generically just go to the groundwater basins when they're overdrafted, and everybody knows that, and that's why we have Sigma, not really a good reality. Trying to do other types of activities, maybe on farm or something like that, maybe that's the future, and we're open to those kind of discussions, but that's still a discussion that needs to happen. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is that they presented no real alternatives to our water loss. Yes.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Ashley.
Yeah, I have a question about the science. You've had a lot of the modeling showing the increases in populations for various flow regimes. It seems, I'm not involved in the settlement negotiations, but as an outside observer, it seems like one of the issues is there doesn't seem to be much consensus around the science of what is actually going to help the fish in terms of a combination of restoration, some of the other methods you mentioned, and flows. And so I know you've got science you're presenting as part of the Tuolumne River Plan, but I guess my question is how much of their work has been done to try to create some consensus around the science of what really is going to help the fish?
It's a really great question. A lot of the science is, people have different science, whatever models that they build and such. We built one specifically for the Tuolumne River. There are other models such as the California CalSim model, there's the salmon model. much more generic, higher level, not very granular to a specific river complex. We have our modelers sit down with their modelers. We kind of go over the data. What data are you using? What are the assumptions? We try to bring people together that, in an objective way, that's not a subjective sort of discussion, like what's coming out of that. We've been working very hard on that for the past about 2 years now, but we still run into like I would say the roadblock that basically is, if you're not getting the answer you want, then you have to go figure out how to get the answer you want someplace else. And that's what we're running into with some of the regulatory agencies. It's really an unfair statement on my part, but it's the way I kind of feel about how we're going through the process.
Could I follow up on that, please? And thanks for being here, Michael. I just look at the investment we've made in the Delta Stewardship Council's One Science and bringing people together on a global basis to try to get to some of these hard questions about modeling and all of that. It's not specifically applicable to the Tuolumne, but it is. Is there something there that we should be bringing more scientists together more frequently than they already are to help work out some of these knotty problems?
I think that would be excellent if you could, especially some of those that are actually been expressing their opinion through blogs and other things, who are really sort of well-known and respected in the industry. They don't tend to work for just anybody.
Collaboration.
Yeah, and so I think there's an opportunity that's going to present itself where they can come together and actually, I'm going to use the word prescription, but actually they can prescribe what a restoration effort on the entire ecosystem would look like. When you talk about the Bay Delta, you start talking about the San Joaquin, the Sacramento, the Delta itself. You talk about the Northern Arch on the Sacramento side. You talk about where you can get the best bang for your buck on productivity, where you want the water, when, and such. There's a lot of opinions out there, but I think it's starting to gel a little bit more around that group of scientists. Thank you.
I totally agree with that, and we took a group from the Sac Valley and we went up to Yakima, because up in Yakima they're doing some great things. I mean, it took them a long time to get on the same page, and they have an adaptive management program that they have state and federal regulators, the local, the Yakima Nations involved, and the big irrigation districts, and it's a collaborative effort, but it took years to put that together and years of fighting. But the one thing I see is, on the Sacramento, we're doing the same thing. We're developing science, and we find, and I just believe combat science, there's a no-win situation, because when you end up in court, the judge says, well, the regulator's right, you're wrong, and off you go. And that doesn't fix the fish. And that's why we've got to get into some collaborative environment where we have everybody in the room, you make the best decision you can make and move on. But with that, when you go to adaptive management, you're going to have to re-educate the regulator, because a regulator does not want to say, turn the water on or turn the water off, because if one fish dies,
Right.
he's in trouble. And it's much easier to say, just increase the flow and we're going to see what happens. When you go to adaptive management or functional flow type arrangements, everyone's got to understand it may work and it may not work, but we're collaborating and we're moving forward, and I think that's the biggest challenge we face on our side of the fence with our regulators, because they're just not wired to operate like that.
Agree.
Yeah, go ahead, Bryce.
Michael, I was wondering if I could ask you, what is the level of awareness of the people of San Francisco in relationship to the regulatory process of the State Water Board? When we were in Merced a few years ago, it was during the drought. We had a large auditorium with standing room only, a lot of emotion, a lot of energy, negative energy in the room. But I was wondering if we would come to San Francisco and want to meet on the State Water Board process, would we get a full house? Are people aware of that, or what is the level of awareness and concern of?
So we've had several workshops before our commission. It's a commission that's appointed by the mayor and it's confirmed by the Board of Supervisors. And so we've had 3 or 4. We've had large groups show up for that. We've also done a presentation at the Board of Supervisors just to let them know. We constantly keep our elected officials up to speed on where we're at in the process, and they've been very supportive of writing letters and such. It's interesting, but we also think it's the large businesses in San Francisco, the hotel industry. You think about the tourism in San Francisco. You think about the large companies that are based in San Francisco. We have been reaching out to them to make them aware of this because they want to be there. So the Salesforces of the world, the Twitters of the world, all of them are in San Francisco. And, you know, we want them to stay there, but they need to know that they can grow their office complexes and have their people live there and such. So if you have just a hearing, you'll get the usual suspects, but we also have the balance on the business side and the community side as well. So it's been interesting, but there's a bit of a political campaign going on trying to get us to back the state board's proposal.
So I'd like to follow up a little bit. Do your ratepayers, do they understand? I guess you spent $4.8 billion since 2008 in infrastructure improvements. Do they understand that they're looking at possible cuts in flows long-term that actually might slow or stop growth within your areas there?
Yes, it's a great question because one of the things that we do is we do 4-year rate packages. So we just passed our 4-year rate package, and so we brought all those types of businesses, community organizers, things of that nature, in to talk about the rate package to show them the value they got for the rate increases. And we constantly do that. It's important that you keep them kind of involved. Having said that, we've also been telling them, like, well, you've invested this money, but you might not be able to use all those assets as fully as you might think. And if you're on the development side, there's a lot of push for affordable housing in San Francisco. We're supposed to produce 30,000 units over the next 4 years, which I think is going to be a real lofty goal. And there's a big push for increase in office space in San Francisco. It is becoming, again, sort of a destination place for people to come live and work. So we're constantly out there in the community, in the neighborhood groups. I live in San Francisco. I go to the neighborhood meetings. I don't tell them who I am. But I want to listen to what the people that I live and work with, what they're thinking and saying. So it's a great question.
Yeah, hey, quick question. The other climate change is going to bring not only potentially more uncertain and longer droughts, but more fire. And I wanted to ask about, it was 4 or 5 years ago that the Rim Fire burned through your the watershed that had a lot of your infrastructure. I'm curious if you have any insight into sort of how that process went and how much fire factors into your planning and threats to water supply.
It factors in quite a bit. 2013 was the Rim Fire, started in August. I think I was home maybe like 3 days over 6 weeks because we were concerned about it burning into the Hetchy watershed. It had already burned into the Cherry watershed, and the devastation is quite remarkable. Fire comes into play a lot because as we lose sort of the ecosystem, the ground hardens, we don't have the trees, and the runoff is completely different. The question goes to climate change as well. As we've been noticing the loss of low snow, the 4,000 to 5,000 foot snow, so it's turning into rain more, and when a fire goes through and it hardens that ground, it just kind of runs off. So we're preparing for that. I mean, we're trying to plan ahead on erosion control measures, revegetation, things of that nature, and it's always on our mind every fire season. And my heart goes out to everybody that's actually been harmed by fires.
Thank you. Really appreciate your time here and your presentation. Thank you. We're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about SGMA. Our panel discussion on SGMA will consist of Jeff Caratano from the San Benito Water District, Ann Dubé from Sonoma Valley GSA, Peter Brown and Mick Gleason, Indian Wells Groundwater Authority. Jeff Catatano is the general manager of the San Benito County Water District and also serves as the groundwater sustainability agency for the county. Ann Dubay is the community and governmental affairs manager for the Sonoma County Water Agency and the GSA administrator for the Sonoma Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency. Peter Brown and Mick Gleason represent the Indian Wells Groundwater Authority. Peter is the vice chair of the Indian Wells Valley Water District, and Mick Gleason is the Kern County supervisor. Welcome. So,
Looks like San Benito's
yep,
gonna
let's start on my right.
Well, except we've already got San
Ah,
Benito.
sorry, San Benito's up, ready to go.
And then to advance, just press the arrow key.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Jeff Catania. I'm the General Manager for San Benito County Water District. Was want to start it out this morning kind of giving you some background about the district and our groundwater basin. Our groundwater basin that we have is what we call a closed basin, so it presents some challenges there for us. Being closed basin, everything that comes into the basin stays there, including the salts and things that build up in the basin. Salt buildup in the basin has also been a problem with the water softeners in our area. Our basin is naturally high in total dissolved solids because the majority of the water comes through marine sediments. So with that, it brings calcium and magnesium with it in the water. The water quality naturally coming into the basin is generally about 700 TDS coming into the basin. So when you have that kind of water quality in your basin, it drives everybody that's using that in an urban area to use water softeners to help minimize that problem. Over the years, we've had some pumping problems, and led to the declining groundwater basin. And at one point, our groundwater basin was about 200 feet lower than it is today. So it was significantly lower. But our groundwater basin does provide us with a significant, basically a bank account for us. Throughout the drought, we were able to manage that issue because our groundwater basin basically holds about 500,000 acre feet of usable water. If you want to compare that to San Luis Reservoir at 2 million acre feet, for us that's pretty sizable. Our local reservoirs totaled up are only about 43,000 acre feet. So, and for us, that's about 1 year's supply. Our demand in our area, we're a fairly small agency, but there is a lot of things that we do in San Benito County. Our average year demand for M&I, or municipal, industrial, urban use, is about 9,000 acre feet a year. And for the agricultural demand within our Zone 6 area, which is the one that has the federal project water that comes into it, it's about 31,000 acre feet of water a year. So about 40,000 acre feet in our basin is used each year. From the supply side, of that 40,000 acre feet of annual use, about 28,000 of that is currently coming from groundwater. Our 10-year average for CVP and spot market deliveries, the federal water that we bring in and then spot market water that we buy to supplement that is about 12,000 acre feet. Our groundwater model, we've got a numerical model that we've built for our basin, so we've been spending a lot of money and time doing this. Has indicated that it takes about 20,000 acre feet of water a year to keep our basin in balance, imported water. So over and above what naturally occurs in our basin, if we don't import on average about 20,000 acre feet a year, we're going backwards. So right now we have, over the last 10 years, we've got about an 8,000 acre foot shortfall on average, which creates a problem for us. So if we look at our 10-year CVP allocations, it would indicate, you would think that, well, you need 20,000 acre feet of water a year, and on your CVP allocations, you're getting almost 18,000 acre feet of water a year. That's somewhat misleading, because the problem there is that In a lot of those years, we get 100% allocation. If we got 100% allocation, I can't put all of that water to use. I have a limited amount of demand in my system, in my, in between urban and ag uses. And so if my contract amount is 43,800 acre feet, if I can actually only put 20,000 acre feet of that water to use in a given year, that means that there's 23,000 acre feet of water that's in that 18,000 acre foot average that hasn't been used in those particular years. And a lot of it has to do with the way that it comes. That, if it all comes in one year and I can't store it from one year over to the next, then it goes back to the Bureau of Reclamation and it gets reallocated into the next year. So let's see here. For our groundwater basin, our management we've been doing it for years, about 65 years now. We started back in 1953 is when our district was formed. And it was formed because there was an issue in San Benito County with overdraft, and they were looking for solutions to that. It began with development of local surface groundwater and surface water supplies. So our district worked with the Bureau of Reclamation at that time to fund a project where we built Hernandez Reservoir, and then we rebuilt what was an existing reservoir called Piscinas. Between those two reservoirs, there's about 20,000 acre feet of storage in there. In the 50s, the district also started working with the Bureau of Reclamation on the San Felipe project. And in 1967, it was finally authorized by Congress to move forward. And by 1987, we actually had the project came online. So yeah, it does take more than 3 years to build a project. Again, we've been doing this for 65 years. We produce an annual groundwater report that reports the state of the basin each year. There's a different focus on every 3 years. We focus on groundwater supply and the balance in the first year. The second year is on water quality in the basin, and then the third year is open for whatever is the issues that are coming up, that are specific to that particular time. So we also have a groundwater management plan. So again, like going back to what I said, we've been doing this for a long time and been very conscientious about managing our basin. In 1998, which is the year that I happened to come on with the district, we developed our first groundwater management plan. And in 2003, it was updated to include some updates that were necessary to deal with the city of Hollister and their wastewater issues. And then this last year, in 2017, we formed our Groundwater Sustainability Agency. So what are some of the challenges that we have with groundwater management and sustainability? Well, first, having that need for 20,000 acre feet of year in our basin to keep it balanced is a challenge. The CVP allocations have been shrinking and less reliable. It's more difficult to count on that water each year, which makes it more difficult for my growers, which depend on a lot of that water, to be able to count on what they're going to do for contracting. They're looking at putting their contracts in place usually in October, November of each year. And I can't tell them what the allocation is going to be a lot of times until May of the next year, the final allocation. We used to get our allocations in February. The Bureau of Reclamation would come out, give us our initial allocation in February, and we would be able, and then the growers would have some assurance of at least what, a minimal amount of what the water supply is going to be. But the last few years, I haven't been able to tell them what, even come March 1st when our contract year starts, we haven't gotten an allocation. So it's very difficult. What we do in those years, and what we have been doing, is the district has the ability to store some water in its reservoirs. We have a reservoir that we have 10,000 acre feet of storage in, which is about 50% of the annual demand. That's an off-stream storage that we put CVP, or the federal water, in. So if I'm able to hold enough water over from one year to the next and keep that reservoir full, at least I have some water that I can tell the growers and the urban community that they've got water that's going to be available. The cost of imported water has been increasing significantly over the last 10 years. It's increased 110%. That's the cost to my users. Currently, the approved ag rate is $272 an acre foot and $363 an acre foot for municipal use. That's getting to be pretty expensive. When they can pump groundwater for about $100 an acre foot with power and everything else concerned, it makes it difficult to tell the growers, because they've got to compete with other people in other areas that you really should be using this water. A lot of them will still use the water because the water quality is superior to the groundwater, so that there is a benefit to them there, and they do see that. So I generally am able to sell most of the water that I have available, and when I do have the 20,000 acre feet, most of the time it does get used, even at these prices. So. Some of the other things that we're running into with sustainable groundwater management in the areas that are outside of what we call Zone 6, which has been managed since 1977. And we have, in that Zone 6 area, we already monitor pumping and groundwater use, and so it's reported to the district, and there is a fee for that. But outside of that Zone 6 area where the federal water is delivered, has not been monitored closely. So there hasn't been any requirement for measuring wells and the use of water on the wells, and there have been no fees implemented in those things. So out in those areas, it's been the discussions have been difficult and challenging, because they're not really excited about the idea of now having to be regulated, and what they're worried about is a plan that's going to come in and tell them that they've got to reduce their pumping. The rising cost of and competition for spot market water has been difficult. In the height of the drought, I was paying over $1,000 an acre foot for spot market water to be able to bring it in. And my growers, I was able to, because of some other water that I had, I was able to turn that around and sell it to them at $760 an acre foot, which was still very expensive, but they were willing to buy it because they needed it. Primarily, they were losing money when they were buying the water at $760 an acre foot, but they were willing to continue to do that and do it because they were able to keep their crews busy and their farms operating. If they were to lay off people, and I'm sure you guys know about the issues with labor, it would be really difficult for them to get that labor force back if they laid them off. So they were willing to lose money in those years at that price of water to continue to keep operating. And the last thing on the list there, the sustainability requirements are only going to drive spot market water higher. As all of our agencies are trying to manage and figure out how we're going to be able to manage the sustainability requirements to keep our basins in balance, it's going to drive spot market water even higher. So that's going to be a real challenge. This chart here, I wanted to show you just kind of to go back to the regulatory issues. And I'm not going to go through each one of these just on this bar chart, but what's on this bar chart is just from 1992, it's hard to see, from 1993 through 2010, are the actions that have been taken to basically redirect water out of the state and federal projects for other uses. If you look at that in that period from 1992 to 2010, there was over 3 million acre feet of water that was redirected from the two projects, from those actions. And that has had a direct impact on our ability to, and our annual allocations that we get. So what are the sustainability tools that we're using and going to be doing? We're going to maximize the use of the imported water when it's available. So we're going to build new storage, and I'm sure you've heard about the expanded Pacheco Reservoir that our district and Santa Clara Valley Water District are embarking on, and it's wonderful that we got a grant for the $484.55 million. That's going to help significantly. We're going to use direct percolation of imported water into our basin. We have been doing that historically, but we're going to continue to do it. There was a period of time when we were unable to do it because we were fortunate to be one of the only agencies west of the Rockies that have zebra mussels in their reservoirs. So that reservoir that I was talking to you about that holds the federal water has zebra mussels in it. So where I was able to release some of that water into the streams when I had 20,000 acre feet of extra water available to me, I can't do that as often as I'd like to anymore because the fact that there are zebra mussels in that water and the potential for that to come through our system and be released into the streams. So so I have to be very careful about doing that. There are some areas that I could do it that are off stream that we use to be able to percolate water when it's available, but it's limited. We're going to increase the availability and use of reclaimed water. We worked with the city of Hollister, and between the two of us, we spent about $140 million on water projects to be able, and part of that is to be able to get reclaimed water. The city of Hollister built a reclamation plant that was about $80 million to $100 million. That's state-of-the-art as a biomembrane process. And the water district, my water district, built 2 surface water treatment plants to be able to use CVP water to deliver to the city of Hollister residents. What that's done is it's enabled the higher quality water that's going into the city of Hollister now has enabled us to convince the people that live in the city of Hollister to get rid of their water softeners. So now the water, what was coming out of the wastewater treatment plant at about 12 to 1,400 parts per million in total dissolved solids is now at about 800. And so that now makes that water suitable for reclamation and use on irrigated crops. The best thing about that is that CVP water that gets used in the city now gets, for every acre foot of water that I bring in, that water gets used twice instead of only one time. Goes through the city's process, gets delivered, the city of Hollister residents get to use it, and then it comes back out the back end of the reclamation plant, and I get to deliver it to my growers for recharge, reclaimed water. We're going to continue our conservation efforts on ag and urban. On the urban side, we've been able to reduce our urban demand from about, in the last 7 to 10 years, from about 150 gallons a day per capita down to 100. So it's a significant reduction. We're not at 40, but I don't think we'll ever get there because we still have, there's still people that have yards and lawns and things. But we do have programs to remove your turf. But our outdoor uses, as in most cases, is about 50%. So if we all lived in apartments and high rises, our use would probably be about 50 gallons a day per capita too. Again, we're going to maximize the use of local surface water, build new storage, the expanded Pacheco Reservoir. One of the other benefits of that expanded Pacheco Reservoir is that 2 years ago when there was a storm event that came through that flooded a significant area in San Benito County, there was about 50,000 acre feet of water that went, the existing Pacheco Reservoir that's there is only about 7,000 acre feet. There was about 50,000 acre feet of water that went over the spillway and out and ended up flooding a significant portion of San Benito County. That expanded Pacheco Reservoir is going to be able to store that water now. It'll be able to capture that. It's going to be about 140,000 acre feet. It'll be able to capture that and then store it for re-release. In addition to that, one of the benefits of that expanded Pacheco Reservoir is the Central Coast Steelhead. So the way that we packaged this project together was to look at how can we benefit the fisheries in Pacheco Creek and be able to maximize the amount of water that we're going to capture and use in our basin. So that water there'll be about 9,000 to 10,000 acre feet of water a year that's released into the creek for the benefit of the steelhead. The side benefit of that is that's now that's about 9,000 to 10,000 acre feet of water that's going to come into our basin and percolate into the groundwater basin that's going to have an additional benefit. So on our modeling efforts, there's about a 3,000 or 4,000 acre foot benefit to the groundwater basin, because not all of it is captured and percolated. Some of it does pass through because you have to have some flow that goes through for the fish. But there's a benefit there of about 3,000 or 4,000 acre feet. So that's one of the tools that we're going to be using in our SGMA process to help balance our basin. And we also have reoperation of our local reservoirs to maximize the benefit to the ecosystems and groundwater recharge. We have built a model that helps staff predict when and how much water to release into the creeks from our local reservoirs to maximize the recharge. There aren't really any, in the two reservoirs that we have, the local reservoirs for local water, there aren't any fisheries in there because the way that the river operates, it dries up in the summer. But we do have a model now that will help my staff to be able to know when and how much water to release when I finally retire, and I'm not there to tell them anymore. So the final message that I have for you today is the shrinking imported water supplies is going to impact our sustainability. It's just you can't get around that, and you can't conserve your way out of this problem. The loss of imported water could lead to a 50% reduction in crops and jobs in San Benito County. If I lose that imported water, that's 50% of my water supply, then I'm going to have no other choice but to reduce pumping if I want to manage, balance my basin. Because there's not a lot of other tools that we can do. Like I said, you can't conserve your way out of this problem. There's over $300 million that we have in water-related infrastructure that's at risk due to reduced imported water. Between the federal facility that we are buying from the federal government, that was $100 million that we invested in 1987. Those are 1987 dollars. So it's a significant investment for our district. In addition to that, there's about another $200 million that we've invested in projects to be able to help. And that doesn't include the expanded Pacheco Reservoir. Groundwater quality is at risk to concentration of salts. If the groundwater basin continues to drop, those salts are only going to concentrate and be more of a problem. San Benito County is the home to one of the largest organic processors in the world, Earthbound Farms. There's about 700 people that work there on a daily basis at Earthbound Farms, so that's significant for San Benito County. And finally, we've got over 65 years of water supply planning and work at risk due to the loss of the imported water supply. All of the work that we've been doing since the 50s is really all centered around bringing imported water in and trying to balance the basin in that way. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Jeff. I want to throw a real quick question at you. Have you, since you've had a groundwater sustainability plan in place for quite a long time, how well does that conform to the state standard that you're going to be submitting by 2020?
The state standards. Can you hear me now? Okay, good. The state we had the groundwater sustainability, or the groundwater plan that we had did not meet all of the state standards. Otherwise, we would have just submitted that as our plan, which was why we're going to be going through and doing a sustainability plan that's incorporates the existing plan that we have, but expands upon it. Part of the reason is that it didn't include the sustainability, the current plan that we had focused mainly on the Zone 6 area with the imported water and some of the surrounding areas. It didn't include some of the pieces that are further south from us that were determined to be medium priority basin. And so it had to incorporate that in order to be included and be considered a complete plan. In addition to that, in our plan, we've actually incorporated in what we're going to be doing in this sustainability plan is we've incorporated a piece of a basin that was actually a low priority basin. because it actually did have a significant impact on, because it flows into those medium priority basins.
Thank you. Are you, one other real quick question, how are you going to incorporate your area outside Zone 6? They're all part of your GSA, you're gonna have a 218 election for those landowners and bring them into monitoring at the same level you're doing within Zone 6?
That's going to be one of the major challenge, and I think that's one of the pieces that when the state put the whole sustainability plan together, that they didn't, the tool that they left out of it was how you're going to implement and get past those 218 issues. Because all it takes is the landowners to say no, and you're dead in your tracks.
Right. Well understood. Well, Ann, why don't we have you come up and welcome.
Thank you. Is that, can you guys see that? Oh. I don't know if you can see my presentation. There we go. Okay. So anyway, I am Ann Dubé I work for the Sonoma County Water Agency, but we actually have a contract with all three of the groundwater sustainability agencies in Sonoma County, and I'm the administrator of all three of those. So that's Petaluma Valley, Sonoma Valley, and Santa Rosa Plain. And what I'm gonna, Josh asked me to talk to you about today was some of the challenges with the basin reprioritization that Department of Water Resources recently released in May. So just for a little bit of background, Sonoma County, located about 30 miles north of the Golden Gate, and there's about 500,000 people that live in the county, mostly living in cities located along the Highway 101 corridor, and those cities actually rely on primarily surface water from the Russian River that the water agency delivers to them. They have some groundwater wells, primarily right now for emergency backup, although some of the cities use a little bit of groundwater. The county, while it has a significant urban population, also has very vibrant agricultural area. The 2017 crop report that was just released found that crop values in that year were nearly $900 million, which doesn't include, of course, the multiplier effect that we see in our economy through tourism and other jobs that are related to agriculture. And wine grapes dominate our ag, with about 2/3 of our total crop value coming from wine grapes. But we also have dairy, livestock, poultry, nurseries, vegetables, silage, apples, and a lot of smaller crops. So as you can see from this map, and I hope you can see it on the screen behind me, like many coastal communities, Sonoma County has a really complex geology. And prior to SGMA, DWR identified through its Bulletin 118, 14 groundwater basins and subbasins in the county. And those areas outlined in bright green indicate those basins and where they were located. And you can see that the larger ones are in the central part of the county on the valley floor, but we also have some in the coastal areas. And this, in the orange or the yellow, are the basins that were designated as medium priority when SGMA became law. And so as background, basins that were designated medium, high, or critically overdrafted were the first ones to comply with SGMA. So we pretty much immediately after SGMA was passed, we engaged an impartial facilitator to conduct a stakeholder assessment in all three basins. And she spoke to a huge variety of stakeholders, and what we found is that in every basin, they wanted local management, and by local, they meant within that basin, control over their groundwater destiny. And so the folks in Santa Rosa Plain did not want Sonoma Valley deciding for them, and Petaluma didn't want Santa Rosa, and so we went into negotiations to create 3 GSAs, one for each basin, and over 2 years negotiated the joint power authorities, budgets for the first 2 years, governance, all those kinds of things.
And unlike San Benito, which has a long history of groundwater management, we had voluntary management programs in Santa Rosa Plain and in Sonoma Valley. And in Petaluma Valley, we were going through a detailed USGS study. But generally, groundwater management has been really new to our community. So in May, DWR released its reprioritization document, and it moved 3 more basins in Sonoma County into medium priority, including Lower Alexander Valley, which is, the Russian River flows through it. It's a prime grape growing area, very rural in agriculture. There's no incorporated cities or towns in just a tiny piece of Healdsburg in that basin. Dry Creek Valley, which again, very rural and no incorporated areas. And then a big chunk of West Sonoma County, basically going from kind of Sebastopol west to the coast. And so unlike the first 3 basins that were required to comply with SGMA, these basins have very, as I said, very few municipalities, they're small populations, and they're really rural. In addition, these basins have not historically been characterized by groundwater problems. There are some areas in the West Sonoma County that have uneven groundwater, and it's primarily related to the geology, not to overdrafting or neighbor problems. So reprioritization concerns. I mean, the first one, for phase 1 GSA costs, and that's formation through the adoption of the Groundwater Sustainability Plan, we're estimating it's costing $2.7 million per basin. And so adding 3 new basins in Sonoma County is about $8 million for our local community to absorb. And because this is primarily in unincorporated areas, it would most likely be the county that would have to pay for a lot of that. And they're actually, the county government is really reeling right now from the cost of responding to the wildfires and the just ongoing cost that is putting on the community. We were super fortunate. All 3 current basins got $1 million each from Proposition 1 for the groundwater sustainability plans. But that money has now been all allocated, and if the November water bond passes, there would be additional funding available, but if that doesn't happen, we're not really sure what funding is going to look like in the future for those 3 basins. So that's just kind of a community concern regarding reprioritization. A concern from more of the, I think, policy level, and I think it's more of a statewide issue, are concerns over some of the metrics that were used to determine the basin's prioritization. And a good example of this is water quality, where Department of Water Resources gave equal weight to contaminants in groundwater and to naturally occurring minerals that don't cause harm to humans or environment, like iron and manganese. And our concern with that is twofold. First, in most cases, there aren't really management actions that a GSA could take to address things naturally occurring minerals, like iron and manganese. And the second concern is that, well, these constituents can, impact the smell and taste of water. They don't harm human health, and they don't make the water not drinkable. So we're not really sure why they're a water quality issue. Another area of concern over the reprioritization is actually estimates over groundwater use. And the numbers that DWR used to estimate water use of crops in particular was of concern to us locally because they're significantly different than what our local estimates are and then what an earlier DWR study found. So for example, in this table, the first bright yellow band is the numbers from the recent reprioritization. And at the bottom line is vineyards, which are our biggest crops. And this is just for one of the basins. It's an example. DWR's estimate was 1.15 acre feet of water being used annually to irrigate 1 acre of a vineyard. And that differs significantly from the last yellow column, which is the USGS estimates of applied groundwater use in that same basin, which was 0.9 acre feet. And then also in the middle column is the 2010 agriculture and land use water estimates from an earlier DWR study that found 0.61 acre feet of irrigation, of water being used to irrigate an acre of vineyards, which is much closer to what we hear anecdotally and what some of our smaller studies of the basins have found. And the estimate use is really important, I think, not only locally, but at the state level, because smaller basins without a lot of use kind of have a get-out-of-jail card free. They don't have to comply with SGMA if they don't have other water quality or other groundwater issues like subsidence or stream water or groundwater issues. So for some basins, they could maybe not have to apply. SGMA would not apply if proper irrigation estimates were used. And I think just in communities like ours, with no irrigation districts, the water use estimates have become really important. As what Jeff mentioned, we try to figure out who pays for the GSAs and the development of the GSPs, because the California Constitution and the courts have pretty much tied the hands of the GSAs when it comes to fees. Unless we want to take a measure to all the voters in the basin for a parcel tax, we're really limited to fees that are based on groundwater use. And because we don't have those irrigation districts, and because most of our wells are not metered at this point, we're gonna have to use estimates to determine what those fees look like. And so we feel like estimates really need to be a reflection of reality. So on reprioritization, the comment period closed on August 20th. The Association of California Groundwater Agencies, the California Groundwater Coalition, and several other organizations submitted comments, as did many, many people in Sonoma County. I'm sure you all are familiar with DWR's website and can find those comments. And I wanted to really end with a couple of things. First of all, I just want to say that overall, we have been so incredibly pleased in working with DWR. Their staff on this, I don't know if your guys' experience, but their staff has been responsive, transparent, super, super willing to talk to us about any local issues that come up. I mean, they've been incredible, and it's a huge task. But in Sonoma County, I think that the majority of people probably do support groundwater management. I know that the Water Agency's Board of Directors and that our Board of Supervisors absolutely support it. We think, everybody has seen this photo from the Central Valley where groundwater pumping has led to severe land subsidence. We don't want to see this in our communities, nor do we want wells to go dry or for people to have to get their water trucked in because water quality is so bad. But SGMA's complicated, and it changes the whole dynamic of water in California. And it's also really personal. We talk to well owners every day who are really, really threatened by the idea of groundwater management. On the other hand, they love the idea of their neighbor's groundwater being managed, but I think we're all there. So, because SGMA is so critical, we want to wield it really carefully, and we want to really get it right. And we don't think that reprioritization has got it right. And so we think that it should be fixed now before we get too much further down the road. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ann. Any quick questions before we bring on the next two presenters? Chance for questions. Yeah, we'll have questions at the end. If anything burning, we'll, because I agree, I've got questions too, so. Okay, Peter Brown and Mick Gleason.
Mick said he's going to stay here.
Oh, okay, so there you go.
His budget's bigger than mine, so. So is this my clicker here? The right arrow, okay, all right. Same as on my computer. Thank you for loading my program. Did you notice I sent it to you at 2:37 a.m. this morning? Huh? I decided to make homemade salsa instead of doing my job. Turned out really nice. Thank you for having us here. We were kind of given the job of explaining how we came up with our ordinance. And I'm not an attorney. I might look like one sometimes, but And I've been around attorneys for 25 years now in the water industry, so I feel like one too. I just don't get paid. My stipend is $100 a meeting, and if I have 2 meetings a day, it's still $100, so it doesn't quite work out. So thank you for having us here. You guys can see that. So anyways, so Mick here is my buddy, and thank God he has a plane and he flew us here, because it's a 7.5-hour drive here too. So, yeah, so we're good. And you guys are gonna feed us a really good lunch, right? All right, so so on the bottom of my slides, I put little educational snippets because I think things get kind of boring. So at the bottom of this one, I said, "What are you waiting for?" Ha ha. You like that one? Hey, I heard you speak. Anyways, these are just basic facts. I'm going to kind of lay out where we're at. We're entirely different than every single person everywhere. I've been to the groundwater, was it a summit or whatever it was earlier this year, and we have absolutely no surface water, and we have a really deep aquifer, and our water is Pleistocene water. It's 15 to 20,000 years old. It's really good water. Our TDS is 200 or less, so we kick butt on the water quality. Anyways, so just to give you an idea, we're 60 miles from Death Valley as the crow flies. So it kind of gives you an idea. Now we're at 2,400 feet above sea level, but it still gets hot. And, you know, all we have is sagebrush and creosote and reptilian things that run around. The only thing endangered in our area is people if they don't drink enough water. You can read all that. The current pumping, based on multiple studies, the last one we used is a DRI model that the base, the Naval Air Weapon Systems, funded, says we're a factor of 3 to 5 in overdraft. And that kind of plays out with the volume that we see. They have in there our water is declining 1 to 2 feet a year. I'm not sure that's accurate based on what I've known for the last 40 years. It's more like 1 foot to 6 inches, depending on where you're at, unless you have unless you're next to a major producer. Anyways, so the good news is our static water level is at 220 and our aquifer is 1,000. So we're not going to die tomorrow, and we have time. Sigma is a pain in the butt, but it's a good thing, because what better time to manage your resources before they are a problem. So my other job is, well, besides the other jobs, taking care of my family and running my own business, is the water district. And our job is to plan 20 years plus in the future. So everything we're doing now is for somebody else, and our capital improvements are funded that way. So we're at 220 roughly. Aquifer's over 1,000, maybe 2,000 in some places. So it's a deep valley, good water. It's not all the same sponge, but it's similar. So here's your first lesson. This is for the GWR. You guys said we have 5 million acre feet in storage. So that's a lot, considering our extraction's not that much yet. Just a quick history. We did all this. The Kern County came up with the money, and they spearheaded the JPA. So we farmed ourselves with a JPA, and so that gave us the policing powers when we formed the GSA to create the GSP. Sound good, huh? Like ABC? I know, it gets confusing almost. So we finished the JPA, and then we formed the GSA. So we're comprised of Kern County, San Bernardino County, Inyo County, City of Ridgecrest, and the Indian Wells Valley Water District. Just to let you guys know, I did send a compendium of all of our docs, the legal docs. I figured somebody wants some boilerplate or how we're doing it right now. I can tell you how to fund it, by the way. Our legal minds have all schemed on that one. Yes, they are. That's why we had to have, we wanted every single overlying county or entity. The city of Ridgecrest is different because they're actually in the county, and we the water district, actually serve them. But we thought it was important that they were part of the solution. So we reached out for every county, and every county said, we'll play. They're not all playing the same, though, because the vast majority of our area is Kern County. So we kind of came up with weighted votes and things like that to compensate. You don't want a guy that has a sliver giving you his 20% vote, especially when he's not going to pay for it. So we have we have non-voting members too. This is kind of unusual, probably for you guys. Maybe you would have like Fish or Department of Forests or something, national parks. But we have BLM and the United States Navy, and they occupy all the space around us, with the exception of some private property and the city proper. The base is 1 million acres. They're a big entity. It's a one of a kind in the world. So our main employer, and the reason the whole place is there was because of the base was made there during the Manhattan Project. It started back in those days. So they're non-voting because they don't want to vote, because they figured if they voted, they'd have to give us money. So we just take services in kind, and that works pretty good for us. So if any of you have government agencies or something, they won't give you money, those kind of government agencies, but they will, and they can do services in kind. So they're offsetting like $1 million and change of our actual costs. It's working out pretty good. We have 2 subcommittees, Policy Advisory Committee. I liked another place I went to, it says Public Advisory Committee. I'm not sure policy was a great way to name that one. It's been a little problem because, you know, what are they going to do? Write the policy? I don't know. And then the TAC, Technical Advisory Committee. Because we live in a place that's R&D, there's like every 5th person has a PhD. It's true that you don't go to a barbecue and argue about anything unless you have the facts. And then, you know, speed of light isn't even a given there. Say, no, not when it goes by a black hole, it's going to change, you know. So it's kind of a fun place to be, but you can exaggerate, and I do for fun, just to, you know, mess with them. Anyways, so we have tons of information, tons of super smart people, and when they talk, it all sounds good. But it's not necessarily the right information. So like a physicist might want to be a geophysicist or something, and maybe that doesn't really work too good, but it sounds good coming from the physicist. So we listen, and then we end up having a consensus. And so the TAC, Technical Advisory Committee, works really well and helps us a lot. The PAC is starting to help us more as they become more cohesive, because they're comprised of everybody in the valley. We have the major stakeholders, which are we have 2 large ag entities, and then a bunch of little ones, and then you know, the general public. So it's kind of a mishmash. The TAC, everybody has to have some kind of a science degree or the capacity to work in a technical fashion. So that kind of keeps that cohesive on purpose. We have a resource manager, Stetson Engineering. He signed on with us a year ago, year and a half, something like that. That was another thing. It's hard to find a guy to do this. So I don't know where anybody's at in their process, or you guys. But as like you say, as this stuff starts rolling, the brain power out there is going to go someplace really quick, and maybe you'll have to invent one, or, you know, take the guy out of high school. I don't know. But it's working pretty good. Thank you for the $2 million, by the way. That's going to come in really handy. The entire project, the entire process of creating a plan is $5 million and change, but that includes services in kind. So the reason I'm here is to talk about the ordinance that we drafted and we passed, because I guess we're kind of on the front end of making people give you money to finish your plan. And of course we need that. The water district in Kern County, we've already put in jointly $1 million to kind of cover the gap, but we just couldn't stretch it further. And so we decided, well, might as well get everybody used to being part of the solution early. I'm not sure if that was I know you're laughing over there. Well, it's almost working. So we did draft the ordinance, and we did pass the ordinance. It's been read and recorded. And like I said, the data pack that I gave you guys that you can pull up or whatever, I can send it to you. You can read it. It's pretty basic stuff. We used California Water Code 10730, and that allows us to assess an extraction fee to develop the plan. Once the plan's been developed and done, that ends, and then we have to do something more, 218, whatever. Or if the state invents another law, we'll use that one too. Whatever works. So to get to your plan, you have the power to do that right now. You just have to have a consensus of whoever's on your GSA. So, let me see this one. Anyways, I like this one. It says this water, everybody kind of knows this water really never goes away. It's always recycled. You know, been that way since the beginning. These are just sections I pulled out. I'm not going to read it, but this is the justification of how we're doing it. And I kind of figured that's why you wanted us here. So, I don't know if you want to read that, or you're welcome to, or ask questions. That's going to come later, right? So this is pulled right out of our documents. There is a full data document. It's like 55 pages, and this one here has like all the nuts and bolts, how we developed it, where we're from. It has a Q&A section that we give to people. You have to inform people what you're doing. Misinformation rules, because that's emotional based, and you know, it's easy to listen to. So proving things with facts, logic, and reason is everybody's challenge here, and always has been, really. Anyways, go to the next one here. Oh, I like this one too. 45,000 gallons for every man, woman, and child on earth is created out of evaporated seawater. So there's plenty of water out there. I think it's all coming down the rivers up in the Northern California region. I don't know why we moved into the desert. Oh, by the way, our population is pretty small. We're like 32,000, 35,000 in the valley total. So it's a small population. So here's the nuts and bolts of the fee. We came up with $35 an acre foot. It started out at 85. And we knew that we know all these are going to be a problem, especially with the larger ag that has, you know, like 100,000 trees or something like that. And we do have ag that has 100,000 trees in our valley. So what we did is we kept carving it down. We got the grant. Our agencies put in more money. And so we're funding a shortfall of 900,000 and change. That's just what we couldn't come up with. It's not a fixed number because it's all based on our budget and our POAM, our project. What does POAM stand for, Mick? Wake up. POAM? Project something. Action milestones. Project action milestones. You've done your job for the day. Anyways, our POAM is incredibly extensive, and that's basically our project. The entire project, every single detail. It's like multiple pages, like, you know, 5-point font. But that's kind of guiding us on what we're doing. And so until now, our process has been legal. All of it's been legal. The JPA, the GSA, it's all legal, pure legal. Now we're getting into solutions and tangible things. I like this part better, just because the burn rate for legal is astronomical. And you know what? They never really say they're done. What's the deal with that? I want a business where I've really never done, and I can bill you if you ask me a question. And if somebody asks me the same question, I can bill them twice. Anyways, this one, I did not know this. I took these out, I verified these facts, but you guys can verify them again. The point is that even with our growth in the entire state, well, the U.S. really, over 30 years, we're using, this is with all water, we're using 10% less. So it tells you that people are conserving, the message is getting out there. People know. You know, when they see cash for grass and, you know, there's billboards and, you know, everybody knows, especially in our state and the adjacent states. Can't even buy a house now in some states, some areas, until you buy the water for it someplace else. That's an interesting equation. We're not there. Oh, I just had to poke fun at him. This is true. Well, you know, this is true. Purdue University did figure out it takes 364 licks to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop. And all of you in my generation would know where that came from, right? Remember that bird? Wasn't it a bird on a tree branch? And then he bites it and he says 3. You don't remember that one, huh? Didn't watch that TV? You did? You don't look old enough to remember that one. Anyways, it was funny. And then I says, why are you thinking about Tootsie Pops? We need to eat lunch. That's it. Oh, I forgot I put one on there. I think you guys already know this one. We're the only country, I've traveled all over the world, and you just don't drink water anywhere. It's just, even though they say it's good water, you just don't drink it. And then you try to remember not to brush your teeth with it. But here, because of Title 22 and the frequency that we have to sample, what I didn't know is that we have to actually, you know, we tell people that we have an issue within 48 hours of a positive finding. Usually it's coliform or something rudimentary. But we have to tell everybody that, and then we have to proceed for sanitation measures. I was really surprised to find out that bottled water, what was it, once a month? No, water once a week. But they don't have to report. That doesn't seem right. So maybe you guys can fix that particular problem. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to open it up to questions. I've got one for you, though. So what's your solution, since you don't have surface water and you're overdrafting and losing, you're probably net of actual water, 3 to 4 inches of actual water per year within your basin. So USGS just did a recharge study for us, and it kind of corroborated all the other, which is what they kind of want to do. They look at the last 50 years of studies. And so they pretty much verified that what we're using for our number of recharge, I think it was at 12,000. Is it 12,000?
We're using 25,000.
No, what's our recharge? 7,000. Yeah, 7,000. The deal is what I don't understand, and I'm not a geophysicist or hydrogeologist or any other G, but if our water's 20,000 years old, what's the deal? But I've asked that question like 10 times now. So I'm not sure when they date the water that there could be current water in there, but we've done tritium samples, which, when they did the atomic bomb testing on the surface in the 40s, the entire world has some kind of tritium in it someplace, easy to detect. We have 0. So I know at least we haven't had any fresh surface water since 1941, something like that. So what's the solution is 2/3 of our equation is ag, and we're talking with ag and saying, what's the glide slope supposed to be? You guys talk about, you just don't tell people you can't do what you're doing. It's not really right to do that. And also, they want to pay to extend their operations. So we're working with them to jointly figure out how can we do this. So the good thing we do is we do have 1,000 foot of water. What we don't want to do is mine it forever. So the art of this is, where do you end, and how does that glide slope go? So the water, whatever it was, conference that I went to earlier, summit, everybody talked about, the DWR, everybody talks about, they want a gradual glide slope, which means reducing water consumption, ag, everywhere, but ag mostly, because they're the only ones that can, for the most part. And they said, well, if you just stop it, you have to, farms have to go fallow. You have an environmental problem. It costs a ton of money to take 5 or 6 or 8,000 acres that's been farmed and turn that back into something that's stable with a covering on it. That's a big deal, and nobody talks about that. And if they do leave, are you gonna be stuck with that? So it's in everybody's interest to play fair and what's equitable. In all businesses, it's about your ROI. How can you get the ROI to work out? And you're right, you gotta be able to predict or plan your future, because their investments are gonna be based on where they see their crop going. So we're working with them right now, and they wanna help, and they have money. And so the big deal is to sit at the table, come up with a plan that everybody can agree on, and then use the data to drive the triggers, whatever those might end up being. You just can't say, we're gonna do this and this will happen. You have to look at cause and effect of everything you do. The gentleman with the river scenarios, those were interesting. It is all based on cause and effect. So where we're headed, we've already conserved, us via the water district, 35%. And then, and we bought a lot of lawns. The naval air weapon systems, like 70% reduction. There's a few other concerns, industrial, they can't really change theirs. They might have to pay more money or something like that. So in the end, there is one sliver of hope for imported water, is that we have the LA aqueduct that goes along, we actually have two of them, that go along the Eastern Sierras. And so we're looking at the feasibility of wet year water, kind of like you guys, when people have excess water. And we're looking at a water banking potential. So that's a long time from now, to build the appurtenances to and from and to bank it. However, it's feasible, and the costs we're coming up with are pretty good. The last part of the solution is that we've already done a brackish water study. How much would it cost us to treat saline water? Part of the base is, because we're a desert, and there's a playa, the lowest part of the desert, all your solids go to those areas. That's why you have, dry lakes at the bottom of valleys in the desert. There's a lot of salt water under the base in that part of the town. And so we've already funded a pilot study like 15 years ago. It was $2,500 an acre foot to treat salt water, because you have to treat the tailwater till it's dry. There's no ocean, right? And yeah, if we make a salt lake, then it would be some kind of habitat. I'm sure it would be. And of course, we wouldn't be able to do that anyways, environmentally. However, we're really lucky. We have a coastal geothermal facility north of us, and they can use high salt content water, so ergo our tailwater, for their production. So they need water to produce steam. So they just run it down their boreholes, which go up to, 6,000 to 7,000 feet down, and turns into steam. So the cost of treating brackish water right now, based on that scenario, is $400 an acre foot. That's realistic. I won't tell you what pistachio farmers can pay for water. It's probably a secret, but I do know what they can pay for water and still get an ROI. And I don't want to go there. Well, you got to do your due diligence, right? And so we have that, and then we have some really smart guys that decided maybe you can get money out of the government. And so they went to Washington, and they actually passed a law. They got a bill passed, Kevin McCarthy authored it, which allows them to use the residuals from the geothermal, which is located on the base, directly for that area, for utilities or infrastructure and water. And so we just got a possibility of getting $7 million. So there you go. You're laughing at me, are you? No, you're not laughing at me?
You're wrong.
I'm wrong.
That's okay.
Well, you can correct me.
Yeah, it's very simple. There was an NDA, a National Defense Authorization Allowance, that the president signs every year. The royalties for coastal geothermal being located on the military base went to the Department of Defense. Now, that has changed, and the royalties, a piece of those royalties, stay at China Lake, at the operating base in the valley, and it's going to be about $2 to $3 million, hopefully, that'll stay local, and it's going to be directed solely towards water issues. Thanks.
See, he can talk, and it sounds pretty darn good. Any other questions while I got the mic? I'll pass it on.
Just have a quick question. Thank you to all the panelists for a very informative presentation. This question is directed to Jeff Cataneo. I'm just curious because as a city council member for a municipality that depends on or imported water, you had made several references to the, expecting a decrease or reduction of your imported water. And why is that? Is it a matter of just supply? Is it a matter of cost?
It's all of the regulatory issues that we're facing now in the Delta, because the water comes through the Delta, and the challenges that we've had, and you can see from the chart that I showed you, the reductions or the redirection of that water. We do have, we were able to modify our contract with the Bureau of Reclamation for the M&I portion of it. So previously, there was a majority of about half of our M&I portion of our contract was 8,250 acre feet a year, was going unused, and so we went back to the Bureau of Reclamation and we negotiated with them to increase that up to our full contract amount of 8,250. So in addition to that, I've got water stored down in semi-tropic. I've got water stored that I've transferred between our agency and Santa Clara Valley Water District. We work cooperatively. We're both partners on the San Felipe division. So we transfer water between our two agencies when we have extra water. And in addition to that, that's what a big piece of that Pacheco project is going to be, is to have that additional storage there to secure the water for the M&I portion, because it is critical. We were running up against the hexavalent chrome problem in this, because all of the city of Hollister's wells exceeded the hexavalent chrome limit, but that has backed off now since the Division of Drinking Water is having to go back and rethink those regulations. But they may come back again and with a regulation that puts all of those wells in violation of the drinking water standard for hexavalent chrome. So we've put a lot of things in place. So the surface water is very important. We do blend that surface water with groundwater so that we can maximize the amount of benefit that we get from that. So right now we're at about a 60-40 split between surface water and groundwater, if that answers your question. Okay.
Go ahead, Bryce.
I was wondering if I could ask Ann and Peter to comment. Ann, how many groundwater sustainability how many basins do you have in your county, and how many GSPs are you going to need to do?
We currently have, we have 14 basins. 3 of those are currently complying with SGMA. 3 more will likely need to comply. That means 6 GSPs, and I'm not sure what the future looks like in future reprioritizations.
And each one of those is about 2.7 million.
To do the whole, from kind of formation of the GSA, and the complying with the Brown Act, all the things associated with that, including the GSP, yeah.
Well, and Peter, your GSP is for 3 counties, and it's about 5 million?
It's one basin, 3 counties. Okay. So the good thing is I don't know if I read that, but we are a closed basin. Like 90% of all the studies ever done. There's still some outliers that say the water's running through, but we're trying to figure out where it's going. So yeah, all 3 counties, Kern, Inyo, and San Bernardino, and then City of Ridgecrest and us. So one plan, one valley. So we're blessed that way. The $5 million that I showed up there, it sounds pretty high, but we have some groundwater modeling in there that services in kind. There was like $1.5 million, things like that. And that was actually created for another purpose, but we repurpose those things when we can, and that data is excellent to use because it's current. So current data is important.
And those funds, it's about 15 million would come from general funds unless like Proposition 3 was passed and there's like 650 million in groundwater sustainability planning funds in that proposition?
Right, so right now, the Sonoma County Water Agency and the county and all the member agencies are contributing to the first 2 years of the functioning of the 3 existing groundwater sustainability agencies. We're doing rate and fee studies to try to figure out a source for the next kind of part of phase 1. And then the 3 new GSAs presumably would be funded through the county general fund if there's not another funding source that can be identified, and potentially through some kind of rate or fee on the groundwater users.
Hi, from a Kern County perspective, that's a really good question. Kern County has 2 major basins that are critically overdrafted. They have the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Authority, which we've talked about here, but we also have on the other side of the mountains, we have the Kern County Tulare Subbasin, which is a massive overdraft and a massive basin that has several GSPs and one large GSP, the Kern Groundwater Plan, which is developing the GSP, and they're going to have dozens of chapters within that plan to help develop a common strategy moving forward. The Kern County General Fund is not funding any of that. The Kern County General Fund isn't set up as a water district, nor are willing to risk the general fund to make those changes that Sigma requires. So that then moves the funding down to the water districts and the entities that are partners in that, developing that GSP, and they're taking that on. Thanks.
So you have white areas. Who's funding the white areas within your GSPs?
The white areas, we have tons of white areas, we do. In the Indian Wells Valley, on the eastern side of the mountains, which Peter talked about, the county is participating and has contributed to the success on that. On the other side of the mountains, we're taking a different approach, and we have been supportive and we're continuing to support, but they are rallying around a group of people that are managing to fund themselves. Mostly in Kern County, the white space is oil industry. So the oil industry is taking a great deal of responsibility of that. We also have a lot of grazers that are out there that don't use a lot of water, but they are not under any district, and they're managing their own way. Thanks.
I was just curious on the Indian Wells Valley. How many acres of agriculture is in production there, and then what is the potential? And are you doing any? Are the supervisors doing any land use issues, or is the GSA going to take that one on?
Great question. Thanks a lot. Yeah, we have 2 major that Peter talked about farming operations in the Indian Wells Valley. They've moved. One of them has been there and has been pumping water for 40, 50 years, and they have an established water right, and Sigma can't interfere with water rights, as we know, and so we're trying to work with them to find solutions. The other group came in recently, 2,500 acres of pistachios. He's also working with us to solve problems. He does not have the established water rights because he came in after Sigma was signed, or right about the same time. But they're both of those ag interests are involved in helping us come to a solution. You got to understand the Indian Wells Valley, where 86% of our economy is the Navy.
Okay.
It's the largest Navy base in the contiguous United States. And as Peter addressed, the 43,000 people that will live in the entirety of the valley depends primarily on the Navy, and our culture is in that direction, not towards the farming industries. We also have several other smaller farms, and they're also playing a pivotal role in coming to solutions. Everybody knows what's coming. And so we're just trying to create a predictable environment so that we can get develop the collaboration required and the consensus required and the agreement required. And that means, I think, from a farming perspective, the farmers want to see that everybody's carrying their fair share of the blame and the responsibility for success, not just the farmers, and we're helping them do that.
And one question to Peter. Did you calculate an alternate bearing rate on those pistachios?
No, one size fits all when you're doing this particular extraction fee. I think that would be a really tough one. I love farms. I mean, we all grew up with farms. So what my role is trying to create an environment where everybody works together, and the emotions are going to be there no matter what, but they don't have to be there no matter what. And people default to these, I call it a code, a programming code in ourselves. And people just think a little bit further. Everybody thinks a little bit further. There's always a solution to every single problem in the world, always. The key is how do you get everybody on the same page? Just like you guys with your environmental studies of rivers, you know, I like that word, combat. What'd you call it? Combat science? Yeah, I get that. I did probability statistics in college. I know I can make different assumptions, right? But the key is that everybody believes that there's a solution, and there is always a solution. Everybody has to be willing to give something to get into the middle, and that's what we're striving for. So I think we're doing pretty good. Mick's done a great job of leading the ship. He's a retired Navy captain, so so anyways, it's working so far.
Well, thank you all very much. Always great to hear everybody's perspective on SGMA and how they're tackling the funding issues and all their local issues. So thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I did want to have, I did want to have one final comment.
Yes.
Our plan's only going to cost us $900,000, so I'm not sure what these guys are
Yeah,
doing.
we're looking at $1 million, but we have 6 to 7 in our basin, but yeah. We're gonna have lunch in the room across the, around the corner here. Speakers are welcome, and we'll reconvene shortly, 1 o'clock.
I don't know, 15 minutes.